three important things. They presented the need to the people, communication. When you're talking about the standard of excellence, in our transparency, I've used the word sincerity. We are talking about the integrity and also the transparency. All those things will come over there. Presenting the need, the communication, and then proposing the guidelines. So beautifully we see what kind of people they should come. Good reputation, full of the Spirit of God, wisdom, who may be appointed all over for this business.
Just have come to understand that this journey has to happen with a lot of humility as we serve one another. And that's why one of our values is not to point fingers.
All right, here goes. Yeah. So the reason why I showed that video that happened in Hyderabad. A lot of you were praying for it. That was towards the end of last month, and there were people asking me how did it go and stuff like that. And I just want to say it went really well. For those of you who don't have context, that is something that is part of the Operation Nehemiah movement. That is a movement for financial integrity. A lot of people in my church here kind of vaguely know what I do. My other church family knows a lot more about what that is. So my other church family are all the guests that are here, and we're so glad to actually have people from all over the world. And I want to recognize that Claire actually is Reverend Claire. So another lady pastor, and that's something that we at Wellspring as well hold so dearly. But coming back to the subject for what we are going to talk about today and why we are talking about it. One, we are talking about it is because this is a made to order series where a lot of you put in a whole bunch of ideas as to what we should talk about. And one of those subjects was Christian leadership, right? So, but then what we did for today is we've connected Christian leadership with money. So we made it very specific. Christian leadership and money. And that conference was basically a consultation with about 200 mission leaders of the largest mission organizations of India. The IEMs, the FMPBs, the GEMS, and all of that, basically to look at how we need to, as a community, as a church in India, raise our standards. In fact, Jomon, who's the head of Campus Crusade, was there as well. And we've kickstarted a 3-year journey on how all of these organizations together are going to raise our standards in the way we run our organizations, right? It's something that our times that we live in have kind of, in one sense, pushed us to do, but it's also such a good thing, isn't it? Did you know that money is one of the most important subjects in the Bible? Did you know that? Does anyone want to guess how many verses on money are there in the Bible? 2,350 verses, right? You know how many verses on salvation are there? About 350. 2,350 verses on money, right? Guess why? Because we deal with money every day. You know, if you have a wallet, if you go out, you're going to do something with money every single day. And so, I'm so glad actually the reason why we clubbed money is because at Wellspring, we've decided, as the preaching team has decided, that every few months we're going to have one sermon on money. We're going to talk about money. And this is the reason why, because it's so important, right? Today, I'm definitely not going to be able to cover everything there is to cover on money. This stuff, just on money alone, we used to do a series of like 7-8 sermons, one after the other, in the churches, and I'm glad that we are doing it, and we're going to talk more about it here as well. Now, over and above that, what we are going to talk about is how is leadership connected to money, right? Is leadership connected to money? Why and how? Anyone wants to say quickly? The leader controls the money. My gosh, that sounds awful. But it's true. The leader controls the money, right? So, I've been connected with Operation Nehemiah for the last, for almost a decade and a half, and I've had the opportunity to see how Christian leaders handle money, right? And how they handle resources. Have you had this experience? You know, you really look up to someone as a spiritual mentor, and you kind of consider them as your discipler, and you have such high regards for them, and then suddenly you're exposed to how they handle money. And everything in many ways comes crashing down. This has happened to me personally. I'm sure it has happened to some of us. And then you wonder, why is it like this? Why is it that in so many cases we are really bad at this? In many ways, you can in some cases you might say that yes, there's a problem with them. You know, there's a spiritual problem, which is true. There's a dichotomy that they've created between one world and another. But in many cases, actually, it's also because they don't know better, right? There is a lack of teaching. We don't talk about it enough. In our culture, particularly talking about money, particularly in the context of church and missions, is actually quite taboo. Because it's like you are, how can you question the leader who controls all the money? Because that leader is a spiritual leader. How can he get anything wrong? We look up to them. But and so to figure out some of this stuff, this cultural and the larger picture of all of that, we've over the last few years come up with something called the Operation Nehemiah Journey of Integrity Framework. And in general, it's basically just a simple drawing, but has it has like 30 articles written on it. It's a whole book. But basically all that to say that money is not as simple as it sounds, and particularly money in the context of organization is not as simple as it feels. It starts in the heart with the allegiance to God, and I loved some of the prayers and songs that we sang. Can you connect those songs? Christ is enough, right? I want you to be honored by my life, right? The prayers that we sang, I want to love you rather than all these other things, right? And so it actually starts at the very core of our spiritual life, the fact that we have allegiance to God first. And that's a question that we have to keep asking. And then it moves into, all of these. It changes the way I think. If I have allegiance to God, it changes the way I think. It changes the culture around me. Then it changes the people. This leader who is supposed to control the money, it changes him. And it changes everybody else. And at the end of that comes all these other things of, okay, let's have a good system, let's have good accounts, let's be compliant. And all of those things, you can do all of that without everything else, But that will be legalism. That will be ticking the boxes. It's not real. It's just for the sake of doing it. But when you do all of those as a whole, that's when, the overall transformation takes place. So this is true not just for organizations. This is created for organizations, but it's true for us as individuals, right? So does any of this connect with you? So what I'm thinking of doing is finish off whatever I want to say and then open it up for any questions or any comments or any discussion that we want. Is that okay? So as we go along, if you have thoughts and if you want to say something, if you want to ask something, please feel free to do it. We'll try and create some opportunities for that. Okay, but while we are doing that, let me just share some key points on some key points. It's not, like I said, not enough time to talk about everything, but some key points. Let's start with the scripture in Psalm 24, 1, right? The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Key point. Very critical to understand when we start. Now start thinking about this. So if that is true for what all? What is excluded? Is there anything excluded? Absolutely nothing is excluded, right? Including my bank account, my car, my clothes, my stuff belongs to who? Say it. Say it. My stuff belongs to? Yeah. Let me go to the next one, which was again already alluded today. Matthew 6:24. And it's funny how Jesus talks about only money. Like he is talking about money on one hand and God on the other hand. There's a whole bunch of other things he could have chosen, right? But he didn't. He said, you can love either money or God. You can't love both. And this is quite telling when it comes like this. And one more reason why, if that's so important, we should be talking more about it in church. Last week we discussed the parable of the talents, right? Money, and money has the tendency to bring out so many emotions. What are some of the emotions that money brings out in us? Pride, right? What else? Anyone else? And what are? Greed, the young one, right? What else? Anxiety when you don't have enough. What else? Jealousy. What else? Discontent. Insecurity. We talked about ambition. And we connect ambition with money. Right? So money is the primary competitor for space in our heart with God. Primary competitor. And you know how we respond when our wealth or income increases, reduces, becomes stable, becomes unstable, tells me what place it has in my heart. And so I'm going to invite you to go back to a time, or maybe if you are in that time, I don't know whether you have enough. I don't know if you have a lot or earn a lot. I don't know if you're not earning quite enough. I don't know if you are struggling. And can you think about how you respond to that situation? And what does that response tell you about how much of your space belongs to God and how much of your space belongs to money? I love Paul's particular verse, Philippians 4:13. and 14 and 12 and 13 actually. And he says, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. And if you want to really think, if you want to go and evaluate if he means it, just read the book of Acts. Read the ups and downs and the situations and the scenarios through which he went to see if this is true. Whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And you know that verse that we usually generally say for so many other things, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. A lot of times we apply it in the opposite way. I can do all things. I can earn a lot of money through him who gives me strength. Actually, it's quite the opposite. It's basically saying, I can be like this, not dependent on money. I can be content through him who gives me strength, right? And this has nothing to do with how much you have. You know, there are rich people who are discontent. There are poor people who are very content. There are rich people who don't give. There are poor people who give a lot. There are rich people who give a lot, and there are poor people who don't give because it's about money. You know, the biggest danger is when money begins to draw us away from the will of God for us. Isn't it? It takes away our time, our mind space, our priorities change. And before we know it, we remain followers of Jesus only in name. Right? We tick the boxes, go to church, do the prayer. But most of the rest of our life, we serve money in many ways. I'm saying this not because I'm saying this, because Jesus said it. And it's a bit hard to hear, right? And how does this work when we are explicitly working for God? I'm bringing the whole aspect of leadership, and all of us are leaders. All of us are leaders. In our homes, we are leaders. Sometimes we have a responsibility beyond that. We are leaders in our spheres. We are leaders in the work we do at church. We are leaders in many different scenarios where we, like Sabina was saying, control the money, right? And it can happen even in that scenario. It can happen even in church. And that's why we have Operation Nehemiah, because it happens a lot in church. When your work grows, when this church grows, the money will grow, right? And it's extremely easy to get swayed by that, get sidetracked by the opportunities that brings, get sidetracked from the original call of God to us. You know, it can shake you up when there's a lot of money in the bank. And in many ways, in some cases, and by the way, thankfully not in Wellspring, but in many cases, because in Wellspring we have layers of protection against that. But in so many cases, there is a mixing up of what is the mission money or the money of the church or the organization and my personal money, right? And so that can become a challenge. Suddenly you don't know which is which, and then the whole thing you start take ownership of. Forgetting that not only do you not own that, you don't even own your own stuff, right? And so God starts taking a back seat, and that's when ambition and growth become more important than God and what He wants us to do, right? And He starts becoming a tool for my growth and my prosperity, instead of me being a servant to Him for His kingdom, right? And that's why, you know, one of the qualities of a church leader in 1 Timothy 3, in verse 3, it says, here's a trustworthy saying, whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task, Okay, then there's a whole bunch of things. And you can go to the next one. The next verse ends by saying, not a lover of money. And that's why I love the passage in scripture, when the prophet Samuel was giving his farewell speech and he was saying, let me know, tell me, I'm on my way out, tell me, did I take any stuff that didn't belong to me? Did I make use of my position to help myself? Did I cheat anyone? And then those people said, no, you haven't. And so I personally have this aspiration that one day, when I'm old and gray like Samuel, I'd like to ask everyone that I worked with these questions and ask them to evaluate me. And I don't have to wait till then. It can happen right now, and we're going to come to that in a bit. Evaluate me. Let me know, do you think I have been faithful in my heart as a leader? So there's a video here that we might just watch that will help us to kind of bring this home for us. And after that video, there's a slide.
I've worked hard to provide for my family, and we've bought some nice things along the way. But I've heard you say that God owns all my stuff. Can you explain that?
Well, it's the foundation for learning how to handle money His way. Psalm 24 verse 1 says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it." And when we recognize God's ownership, every spending decision becomes a spiritual decision. No longer do we ask, Lord, what do you want me to do with my money? Rather, it's, Lord, what do you want me to do with your money? And I've discovered there's such freedom when we realize that God's the owner and we're simply to be faithful managers of what we've been given.
That's where it comes from, compass1.org. Feel free to go and check it out for yourself. And here's this slide that's going to come up, which probably gives you a little bit of a sense. I'll send this probably on the group so you have this. But you can have a poverty mindset, you can have a prosperity mindset as far as money is concerned, or you can have a steward mindset. Right? Possessions are a responsibility, not an evil, not a right. I work to serve Christ, not to meet only my basic needs, neither to become rich. Godly people are faithful. Godly people don't have to be poor, neither do they have to be rich or wealthy. Ungodly people are unfaithful. Neither are they wealthy or neither are they poor. I give because I love God, not because I must, not because I want to get more from Him. He's not an ATM. My spending is prayerful and responsible. It's not fearful and joyless, neither is it carefree and consumptive, right? This is not just for our individual lives, this is also for us as Christian organizations, right? Let me go to the next couple of points quickly. So, here what I've done so far is I've given a perspective on the fact that money belongs to God, and that is how we must treat it, right? The second thing comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 16 to 20. And essentially this is a whole context where the Apostle Paul has gathered money. Okay, he has gathered a collection and he's sending that collection to people. He's taken it from one church and he's sending it to another church. All right? Good thing, right? It's a good thing. Is that a bad thing to do? Great thing, right? Yeah, so then why does he need to be so careful? You can keep going. Why does he need to be so careful about, okay, but I'm sending this other guy along, with you, right? And I'm sending another person to be together in this whole situation, right? Essentially, having a bunch of people involved in the exercise. And then in verse 20, he says, we want to avoid any criticism of the way we administer this gift. For we are taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of men. Right? All that to say, whenever you're handling money, don't do it alone. That's how you protect yourself. That's how you protect your reputation. That's how you protect the reputation of the organization that you're a part of. When you're handling money at home, don't do it alone. Share, explain, express. Now tell me, what is the challenge of letting a whole bunch of people know what's happening with the money and what to do? And when you make decisions collectively, what are the challenges? Anyone wants to say? It's pretty, sorry? Hard to get consensus, yes. What else? What are the other challenges? It's slow. What else? So, different priorities. Yeah. You're sharing control. Yeah, I knew I did. You're losing your sense of freedom. Thank you so much for all those responses. That's exactly right. Yeah? The tension when you're sharing information is fast versus slow. Is one direction versus multiple. Right? And what's the heart issue? It came out. What's the heart issue? Control. Control. That's the heart issue. Right? But what's the downside of not sharing? No accountability, and you are vulnerable. You're in a difficult situation. You can fail. If you feel you're all honest and all, just like let a whole bunch of money come into your bank account and then see how you think, how that changes. I know that I'm vulnerable. There's no one who is not. If we were not vulnerable, Jesus wouldn't warn us so starkly about it. And therefore, it's our responsibility to have layers of protection in how we handle money. Have multiple people involved, right? I think in Wellspring, we have multiple people involved in our decision. There are at least 2 or 3 4 layers of decision making around money that happens. All right? So, when it comes to decision making on money, share information and let many people know and include many people in that decision, right? The last part. So we said God owns the money. Second, we said share information. Now, the third part is be a good steward. It's not enough to be just honest. You know that, right? It's not enough to be just honest. There was a real honest guy in last time's passage. Do you know who that was? I have one answer here. Does anyone else remember who was the honest guy in last week's passage? The guy who buried that one talent in the ground. He was completely honest. He didn't hide anything. He said, I was afraid of you, so I just hid the money inside. And here it is back. I haven't stolen it. Didn't get a very favorable response, did he? Yeah, because it is given to us for a purpose. Yeah. It is given to us individuals, in our families for a purpose. It's given to us as a collective for a purpose. And we need to constantly ask ourselves, are we fulfilling the purpose for which it was? Are we being wise with it? Are we being clever with it? With the wisdom that God has given us. And so one way of doing this is to actually know what's happening with the money. There's a verse in the Bible which I don't have right now, but it says, know the state of your flocks. It's in Proverbs. This is a big challenge for me, whenever, when it comes to, I have these Excel sheets, and sometimes, it becomes a little bit of a challenge when, there are multiple sources of income and, all of that. But it's worth doing that, because I ask myself one fundamental question with that. How much am I giving? I wouldn't know till I do that evaluation, because my giving is not limited to my tithing, right? My tithing is just the start. It's a basic, bare minimum. Giving is so much more. And it's good to know that, right? And that tells me where my heart is. Sometimes I don't know where my heart is. The numbers tell me where my heart is. Yeah. Same for church. And here's something that we always recommend at Operation Nehemiah. Whenever you are evaluating the direction of an organization, always map it to the money. Because the money tells the truth. Everything else is fluff, mostly. Not really. That's just an hyperbole, okay? Don't take me too seriously. But the money tells the truth. So when you're coming for the AGM, sorry, heads up. And by the way, it is your responsibility. Because that's the way that you are connected to the mission of this church. You must ask the question, what did we set out to do? And how does the money show that? And you have a great system here that has answers to those kinds of questions. And therefore, you must be involved. That's your involvement, right? I heard a few of us saying that the AGM actually is just a tick in the box for legal compliances. Not at all. The AGM is a God-given methodology, not a God-given, but a God-mandated methodology for the entire church to be accountable. To be accountable to ourselves, to one another, right? And so when you are giving, because you all give here, right? You all give here, you are giving to God, that's first, right? We are not calculative about all of that stuff. But accountability is a gift. It's a gift we give one another, right? Asking questions about the money is a gift we give one another that keeps us on track. And that is important when the leadership is collective. Usually, because if there's a one guy, he knows what he's doing, and basically you trust that one guy, and we already know the problems with that. But when there are many people, we all need to hold each other on track, isn't it? And so, map as an organization your vision to your money and see if it's consistent. That's accountability, right? So when the master gave that person that one talent, what was the implicit expectation? That he's going to use that one talent and make something out of it. Okay? Was he honest with his money? Completely honest. Did he do what was meant to be done with it? Not quite. Right? So that's the connection between last time's talk and what we're talking about. So I basically said, God owns all the money. When you make money decisions, make it collectively and make sure the money is doing what it is meant to do. Let me stop here and open it up for any of you if you have anything to say. Did I miss a video? I missed a video. All right. Yeah. There's a video. And then at the end of that video, we can open it up for questions.
I've been hearing you say that the Bible says a lot about money, but why is money so important to God?
Well, one of the biggest reasons it says so much may surprise you. There's an intimate correlation between the development of a person's character and how they handle money. Let me give you an example. Colossians 3:23 says, "Whatever you do, do your work heartily as unto the Lord." In other words, when the carpenter works hard at building a home, the house is building the carpenter. He learns diligence, judgment, he develops skills. In other words, he's developing his character. You know, when I first understood that how I handled money would play a significant role in developing my character, it completely changed my view.
There's a carpenter here who was listening very intently to that. All right, any thoughts, any questions, any comments, any additions to what I said? Yes.
So literally on Friday, someone asked me, so should Christians be communists if they follow the Bible? Shouldn't we just be like sharing everything?
You're supposed to answer that question, Eric. You're not supposed to just ask and sit down like that. Was that for me? Yeah, I think that's coming from a place of where we are asking whether the money is meant to be just given away, and this, you know, all these isms, the communism and the capitalism, where you're putting the money and the money is working for you, which is what the manager seemed to expect from his. We discussed this actually last in the Friday group, and we tied it down to the calling that God has given to each person based on their calling. And we said that it is completely fine for you to have a season where you're saying, right now, I just need to take care of my kids. And so it's essentially if the resources are going in fulfilling that thing that you're called to. We talked about Mother Teresa, who essentially didn't have anything at the end of her life. That was her calling, and she handled a lot of money. She gave much of it away. So she was not giving it away, but she was using it towards what God had called her to do at that point of time. Anyone else?
What is being content? What actually means to be being content?
I think you already have an answer to that question. You're not simply asking a question without knowing the answer. Why don't you tell us the answer to that question? I think the question is, what does it mean to be content? Yes.
I was just thinking out loud. I think for me, as an individual who has been asked to be a steward of God's resources, I think the fundamental and underlying question that I always ask myself is, what do I have that I deserve at the first place? And then if we start from there as the baseline, and we know that we don't deserve anything and everything that we already have is a blessing, then the sense of entitlement doesn't arise. So it's easier for me to say that as someone who is, I don't know, doesn't have a family or all that. But that's where you try to get away with entitlement and say, okay, I don't deserve anything. What I already have is something.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Sorry, totally different thing, but I think one of the things that surprised me when I came from UK to India was the Hindu joint family taxation system, where the family don't have my money, but the whole family has our money. And I remember thinking, oh, that's a good idea. I'm amazed that Christians don't take that as seriously as the Hindus do. The idea that the sort of more than one person is involved in making decisions, whoever earns the money, whoever's spending the money, it's our money, not mine, seems to me a really healthy thing. And I think people don't discuss it publicly enough to know how people are handling it. But the idea that it could be seen as our money, agreed slowly by the process of discussing it and agreeing together, seems like a good one.
That's a great example. Anyone else?
I don't know. I've always felt like it's a lot more complex than just looking at money as money. And I'm saying this from the point of view, if I'm talking from my point of view, which is when you come from a background of financial abuse, then any money you make, you have a very weird relationship with it. You're not able to look at money as a tool. You don't quite know what to make of it. So I think for me, it took years to just overcome trauma associated with money before I could look at money as money. So I think, I don't know, at least for me, all of these things sound great now, but when I started making money, none of this really made a lot of sense, because I came from a place where like daily meals were an issue, so you don't quite think, I don't know, I feel like it takes a long time to get here. So I don't know how we are to, and it doesn't make sense to wait until then before you arrive at this. So I don't quite know. I feel like there's a gap that needs to, or there's a bridge that needs to be crossed for people who come from financial abuse.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Steffi. I think that's very, very important. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I always understood from the gospel itself is that there is grace. And many of the things that we speak of as ideals is not to put them aside and say, no, not now, but later. But I think ultimately, like we were saying, money is spiritual. And so there is a daily conversation with God about it. As long as God is there in the picture, like we were hearing last Sunday, I think that's very important. He will help us navigate that tension. But thank you for bringing it out. Yeah.
Just a thought. Storing money is good and all of that, but also I think there's so many things that translate to money, like your skills, your time, and all of that. So I think the way you store those skills as well, because having that big picture way of looking at things, where the time you put into something, the skill set that you have and how you're utilizing it, in that translating into money, and how much of your time and your resources you're spending on things that aren't amounting to much is also something that I think is important.
Thank you. Yeah, resources are a lot more than money, and all of that has the same principle. Yeah.
I think just from what John was saying, I think the dangerous thing about money is how tightly we tie it to our worth, and how we use it as a measure of who we are as people. And maybe that's one of the reasons why why Jesus talked about it so much, was to remind us that we are not defined, determined, or valued because of money. And while I think to me that's like base and core, right? Of how do we ensure and check ourselves and our heart, like you were saying, right? Of my life doesn't revolve around money, but money is part of my daily life, right? So then what does that like mean or look like for me, you know? Am I reactive to any sort of monetary change in my life? I feel like that idea Uncle was saying, right? Also about like, when are we content? And I think, is contentment linked to where your worth and value really comes from, versus when you link it to money, and then that's possibly where that fluctuation then happens. But yeah, also, my dad teaches a lot about money from like a spiritual perspective, and it's guided a lot of his decisions. And I think one of the things he realized early on was that his purpose in life was not going to lead to a lot of money. But that didn't mean that he didn't need to be a faithful steward of whatever money he did get. Then, I mean, we've been challenged lots by that, where he enjoys that process of asking us questions. But yeah, I think one of the perspectives that helped me was really like, okay, if money is not tied to my purpose and personhood, like who I am is not determined by that, how do I engage with money in a way that, can that money help further what God's purposes are for my life? And can I not react so viscerally sometimes to be like, I mean, I've seen it happen with myself. I'll be like, oh, some little profit gain will happen. And I think I'm like suddenly one great financial guru. I'm fully not. Like, just zero understanding. There's so many factors at play. But that pride happens so quickly of like, oh, I've got this sorted, you know? And so I think that checking of heart becomes such an important thing. But yeah, I think at its base level, to not link our worth to money, but to not like also hold it away, where it can also further the purposes of God's kingdom and his plans for us. So yeah.
Simple thing. Some 25 years back, first time we invested in the shares. From morning till night, always mind is whether share has gone up or come down. It becomes such an obsession. We realized that it is going in a very wrong way. Tension, sleep, that goes up, yeah, you feel high. Go down, oh, you completely come down. So that type of obsession to money, I think, it's not good.
All of that to the point about how do we respond when we lose money and how do we respond when we gain it tells a lot about our hearts, and sometimes we need to protect ourselves from that. Yeah.
Sorry, another thing, again, totally different. But Jesus talked about treasure in heaven, and told a parable about someone who was sort of abusing his master's money in order to make friends, so that when his master sacked him, he'd have some friends. So that was the most puzzling of Jesus' stories, because he's actually saying this guy who stole his master's money is a good example because he spotted that something needed to be done in his life. So that's the hardest puzzle on Jesus' money stories. But I do think the reason he's trying to say that is that actually money isn't the thing that matters most. The treasure in heaven is something bigger. Money is an indicator of value, but it's not the final thing. What really matters in this world? God, people, relationships. Those have real value. And we spend lots of time tracing the money, but whether the money's going in the right places or not really is to be tested by, is it actually helping to value God, value people, value relationships? I think that's where real value lies. We haven't quite got the ways of measuring that, maybe, but God has, and if we listen, hopefully he'll guide us.
I'm glad you didn't ask me any questions about that parable because I don't have the answers. But that's a great segue for us to close, because actually the verse I have right now is from that at the end of that parable, after taking off all the uncomfortable bits. But there's this summary that Jesus gives, and I don't know if guys, if you're able to, Arvind, if you're able to show that last verse, Luke 16. It says, if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? Right? And like that hits you in the face, because you begin to realize that there is something that's connected between what you do with money here and wealth here and eternity, and something that lasts forever. There's a connection. So like Mahi also was reminding us, it's not about actually making it sound like it's not important. It's very, very important. There is a connection between what you do with it and what happens in eternity, and what happens, what are the riches, what are the real riches that it's generating for us. And so John Wesley, he said, earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can, right? He's not saying become a poor person and just keep the money aside. No, actually engage with it in a way that's godly, and some of what we've spoken of today, right?